Okay, how do you hook stuff up? Well, if you want a foot switch, let's just say, for sake of setup here, I put all my effects boxes in front. I have a stop box or two, so I don't really need the effects loop. I hate reverb, so I don't use it, so it's turned off on the head. I despise tremolo. Why would I use that for heavy metal? So all I really want is channel switching, which is this one here. So the easiest way to go, which I had to do for a while, you can order these boxes from Mesa or anyone else. It doesn't have to be a Mesa box. It's just a simple switch with a diode on it and an input. So you can take an ordinary guitar cable, plug it into your switch, run the other end of the guitar cable into what you want the switch to control. And that's it. So if all I want is channel switching from A and B on my amp, this will do the trick. That's why I have it. Since then I've evolved, and now I have two of these that are both two switches, which I can show you in a minute. Okay, on my personal pedal board here, you can see I have two Mesa switches. Each switch controls each of those four jacks that you just seen on the back of the amp. So I can control my channel switching here, my effects loop, the tremolo, and the reverb. Now when you buy these and wire them, you need to have a tip ring sleeve connection because you have two switches. So it's like a left and right stereo cable. And the left is your channel and the right would be your effects loop. And you just wire it the same way. You just run this cable to the back of your amp over here, and you would run your left to say your channel in and your right to your effects loop, and you're done. Okay, in the speaker section, the only thing I'm going to mention, just for reliability reasons, and I don't want you to do what I say. I want you to do your own research and, you know, blow up your own gear. We've all done it one way or another. I'm running a single 8 ohm 412 cab. So I plug a speaker cable, even though it looks like a guitar cable, this is not a guitar cable. Okay, the gauge of wiring is much, much heavier. Never connect your speaker cabinet with a guitar cable. You will blow up your head. Buy a speaker cable. Okay, you only need like a couple feet of it. Plug it into the appropriate output on the amp. Never turn your head on without a speaker cable connected to it, or an attenuator if you need one of those for recording and you don't want to record really loud in an apartment, so you can hook up an attenuator with outputs and inputs on it. The important thing is this amp needs to see a load, and this is only for tube amps. But the tubes they need in the tube power section needs to see a load, or you're going to have a lot of smoke rather quickly. So don't play games with that, and make sure to double check the ohm ratings on your speakers. You've got different ratings on your speakers, especially if it's switchable between mono and stereo. So it might be 4 ohms in stereo and 8 ohms in mono, like this one. Or it might be 8 ohms and 16 ohms. You check your equipment and you study out this ohms business. There are a lot of videos on it that can do it better than I do. They can give you all the mathematics and everything behind it so you don't damage anything. And that's all I'm going to say on the speaker section. The slave out, I don't have another head, but I would just say, you know, if I had another head, just take another cable, normal guitar cable, tip ring sleeve, run it to whatever you're doing. I run mine, I have a custom pedal board that's got a place that the cables go for recording out using this. So this would then go to my board, and my board's output would go to my recording desk. Otherwise, you can take the other end of this and run it into a power amp to run more speakers. You can look into all of those things, and it's got your volume control. So that's basically all there is for your slave out. No special cables needed, just a tip ring sleeve, or tip ring. Okay, for sake of simplicity on the effects loop here, we're going to use one box, which you would want to put generally in your effects loop. And I have a MXR carbon copy here. And you should run your delays and reverbs in your effects loop. Time-based delays and things like that sound best here. It's not that you cannot use this in front of your amplifier. We used to do it all the time. Back in the 70s, 80s, everybody was doing it. There weren't any effects loops, so all this stuff went in front. So what you're going to do to hook up this simple illustration here, run a normal cable, tip sleeve, guitar cable out your send jack and into the input of your effects box. This as well could be an effects unit, a floor unit that does multiple effects. It could be a piece of rack equipment that does all the effects for you, like an old Yamaha SPX unit that does all the reverbs, flanging, choruses, and everything in one box. You'd run this out and into that box, and then out the box, back into the return on your amplifier. Set controls however you want them, and set the mix level for however you want. Now, like on this box, I have a mix level here as well, so if I just leave this full, I can control my mix on the floor right in front of me. The other thing I want to mention about the effects loop is this is a parallel effects loop. So that's why it's called a mix level, because you got two signals going. One is the amps level and one is the effects level. And so if you turn this all the way down, your effects loop disappears. And then you can blend in how loud you want your effects to be, not just on the boxes, but overall. So if you have like 8 boxes and they're all set at different levels and things, you can control the overall level with this knob right here. So it's not rocket science to wire in these things. You just gotta do a little studying into which boxes like to be where. Distortion boxes are not, it's not illegal to put them in the effects loop, but it's not very popular. Okay, they don't sound all that great to put there. Choruses, flangers, phasers, you can put compressors in here. On some occasions, people have done distortion boxes here. I won't. I don't like the way they sound there. But like wah-wahs would go in front of your amp, not in the effects loop. A volume pedal is very good for the effects loop because it's before the power section of the amplifier. So you can control the volume of not only your preamp, but also the effects. The whole smear before it hits the power output. You can control it with your foot. So that's how mine's set up. Anyway, that's how you wire in your effects. Pretty cool. Okay, jumping back to this channel cloning business. The thing you need to do is, if you get one of these old amps like this one, you need to go online and find the manual for it. It's way too much for me to get into in the shortest possible video. But in short, the short take here is that when you assign your orange to the modern or the red to the vintage, when you throw this switch, you are actually changing the way the original EQing of that channel is operating. Okay? So even though when normal, let's say the presence controls more of the mid-range, upper mid-range on that channel, if you assign orange to it, it still does that, but it also does it on the other channel as well with the highs. So they start to interact with each other. If that makes sense. So it's like you have two presence controls now for one sound. So it gets a bit tricky to understand how all that works. It kind of fries my brain every time I read it, but I keep going back to it, trying to get it down. But this is a really, really cool feature of the amp, because sometimes I really want that more vintage sound, but I really do like to have a clean option on my amplifier. I do have a JC120 where if I was performing live in a band and doing big things, I would just have an AB switch and switch to the JC120 for my clean sound and run this amp with a couple of distortion settings. But I do like to play clean, so I like to have that option available, which is the orange channel. And sometimes I don't, you know, I play a lot of older stuff. I'm an older guy. So I started playing in '76. Guitars sounded different back then. The distortions sounded different back then. So the vintage distortion is more appropriate, but it's on the same channel. So I like to assign the orange, if I'm doing this, thinking this right in my head, the orange to the red so that I can have the vintage sound and a clean channel. And you can do the same thing with the red. If you like the blues sound, which a lot of people really are in love with the blues tone on this amp, the tune voicing switch, and you like the high gain and the vintage, you can run both of those without reassigning these. But if you like the high modern gain sound and the blues sound, well, now you're stuck with the same situation. So go red to vintage. And I believe that should give you both of those options at the same time. It's a very versatile amp, is what I'm saying. And you need to read the manual to understand how the front controls, which seems straightforward, but this is not a Marshall. This doesn't act like a Marshall, doesn't operate like a Marshall. You know, the presence knobs on this interact with each other. The tone and mid controls are very touchy and sensitive depending on how this switch is set and how you're using your channels together. And so I think that about covers it. Download the manual. It gets really, really nitpicky about how all this is really breaking down the EQing inside of the amp's controls. But you really need to read up on it to get your head around it, which I'm still trying to get my head around. Okay, talk about the loop select here for just a minute. Again, with the options is bypass if you don't use it at all. You can use it for both channels at the same time, so when you're channel switching, your effects goes with it. Or you can use each channel individually and assign it to one of the orange or the red channel. So that if I like my clean channel on the orange and I'm running a delay with a chorus and a nice reverb, and that's my thing, that's my clean tone, and I don't do any effects on my dirty tone, then I can assign the effects loop specifically to my clean tone on the orange channel only. So when it's on and I switch from the orange channel doing something clean to the heavy distorted tone, my effects disappear and I just have a straight up rock amp. And then you have foot switchable over here to tell the amp that you have a foot switch to turn it on and off no matter what you're doing. So that's all there is for the loop select. You got to remember that if you're in bypass mode, that black knob on the front panel does not act as a master volume control. Only you'll have to manually balance your two channels manually on the front. You can get a mix. It's not that big of a deal if you're running the effects loop and it becomes an effect, a master volume. You still got to mix your channels anyway, so basically it's just, do you want that to be a master switch or not? And that's about it on a loop. Okay, my tube selection for this amp, as I mentioned before, these are all Mesa power tubes that you're looking at right there. I have Electro Harmonics in the rectifier tubes. They're the 5AU GBEH, I believe. In the back, I know mentioned in another video I had 5 preamp tubes. I have 6 preamp tubes. I missed the metal canister input. So there's 3 gain stages. It has a actual reverb tank in here. I'm not sure if it's Ecutronics or not. I'm not sure who made it, but it is a real tank. It's not digital. and then it has a tube-driven reverb. So that's the tube layout. A little quick look on the inside here, if you can see it. And there's your tank input outputs. Great design, great amplifier. Okay, well, this is what the back of my amp looks like when I run my pedal board. And I use a 8-channel snake that is 20 feet long. Takes all my inputs and outputs from the amplifier, runs them all to this board down here on the floor. I'll go over this board in another set of videos just to show how it's my own creation, and I have a couple options on it that are a little different. Inspired by a guy I talked to doing performing on a cruise liner once. He had a pretty interesting thing going on, being a single guy playing, and gave me an idea for this board. So look for that video. Okay, on the last sections of the amp, I'm not going to go too much into because they're pretty straightforward. Once again, you've got your bias switch with your 6L6 or EL34s, whichever one you favor. Just pull one set out, put the other set in, right? For your ground, that's self-explanatory. Just flip it to when you don't hear the buzz no more. Your rectifier select, I'd say to spend time with this. You won't notice a big difference the second you throw the switch. Well, you will when you go from if you're playing on vacuum tubes and you throw this thing into dial mode, you're going to hear it kick up in volume. But after you play on it a while, you'll notice it's a lot more touchy to your fingers when it's not on tubes. Which, by the way, I'm running Electro Harmonix. What is it? 5AUGBEH tubes, I think they are, for these Electro Harmonix. They're not much. They don't cost a huge amount to replace these and experiment with different kind of tubes in your rectifier as well. Spend time on your vacuum tubes. Flip the switch. Come back in 10 minutes when your ears and fingers have rested and play it with your silicon. And you know, you'll notice that there is a difference in the way your guitar plays and the way you feel about playing on your guitar and the way the amp is responding to your guitar playing. Do the same thing with the spongy and bold switch. And remember that when you kick this thing into bold, you're going to get another boost in volume of output, and it's going to be kind of like a solid state amp in response. The one thing that I like about tube amps is there's that slight lag of tubes, and that's pretty much what everybody likes. Not just the tone, but the feel of the amp. And solid state amps are just immediate. They're just unforgiving. They just boom, whatever you touch, do, whatever, it's there immediately. So when you go to the bold mode, you get more of that and less of the spongy, soft attack feel. So play with those two. And with all these different options on this amp, between your rectifier, your sponge and bold, your channel switching, your channel cloning, 4 modes on 2 channels, there is a lot of stuff this amp can do. So I'm hoping that you're enjoying the series and the quick overview of how all of this works. And then I will get into demos. Thanks for watching.